So we're going to talk about kyolic. I've used kyolic now and taught about kyolic for, I think, almost 30 years. And I'm seeing great clinical results with kyolic. And there's a big difference. We'll get to why it's important. But the first step is, well, why do we need to even think about taking kyolic? So first, our agenda, metaflammation and the role of aged garlic. I wish I made up the term metaflammation, right? Metabolic inflammation leads to inflammaging, right? So the more inflamed we are, the quicker we age. What is aged garlic? Because you can't just eat garlic to get the effect of aged garlic. It's very specific. And then how aged garlic manages multiple inflammation targets. And for me, I have 2 books this year. I've written 5 databases for healthcare professionals. This is the most studied ingredient of any ingredient that I've written on. Over 900 publications. So very important that this is incredible science that Wakanaga has put behind this, and then the clinical evidence, which we'll get to. So, when we get metabolically dysregulated, it's what I deal with all the time in my practices when I'm teaching physicians. At the core of this is metaflammation, and we're going to just quickly go through that. And it's also known as inflammaging. So, what are the causes? Well, there's several. One is just getting old. I turn 64 next month. So I had injured my meniscus about a year ago, and I wanted to look up what's the risk factor. And the first risk factor was being 60. I didn't like that. So obviously things happen with age. As we age and all of the impact of chronic stress, we now are understanding microbiome disruption, the disruption of gut inflammation, how we eat, quality of food. Much easier for you here than for us in the US. We got all kinds of stuff in our food, lots of chemicals. Being overweight, environmental burden, lack of sleep. It's a lot of things that determine how quickly you're going to age. So this is how we age. If you look at the top, it could be an irritant chemical, it could be a bug, a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, it could be a genetic cell defect. Any number of reasons can trigger inflammation. And inflammation is supposed to occur because it corrects the original problem. And then we turn off inflammation and we return to homeostasis. Our body goes back to being in balance. But when you get stuck, you don't get enough sleep, maybe you work out too much, not just people that don't work out, but people can overtrain. You're exposed to something. Maybe it's just working long hours. Any number of things, you get stuck in an inflammatory process. And then, these are the things that happen that put you in the funnel of aging. So the first thing is you start to notice more what I call bad actor lipids, or dyslipidemias, right? Oxidized LDL, lipoprotein little a, apolipoprotein B, LPPLA2, so advanced markers of once you're inflamed, you're not making healthy lipids anymore. And then we start to lose muscle. Muscle's the currency of aging. The more you can hold on to your muscle as you age, the talk upstairs right before break, we talked about myokines, and that your muscles release myokines. Those are great for keeping you young. And so you lose the release of growth hormone and you lose perfusion to your muscle. And that accelerates the aging of muscle. One of the obvious things that I see a lot now is people are anemic. They have iron, they have no ferritin. So they have plenty of iron, but they don't have ferritin. And when you are making inflammatory compounds, you turn off your ability to have iron go to ferritin, because ferroportin is the transport that allows you to make ferritin. And when you have low ferritin, you get palpitations, you feel fatigued, and if you start to collect iron, so your iron stays high, iron itself triggers the damage to your tissues and your cells, and cells age from high iron. So you need to be able to store your ferritin. So think of it as a person is moving through this process. So the next thing that happens as you're continuing to create this inflammatory network in your body, all your cells are starting to really begin to create inflammatory signaling, especially your immune cells. The more you have inflammatory signaling, so TNF-alpha goes up, toll receptor 4 goes up, your JAK kinases go up. They don't list interleukin 6, very important for the insulin receptor. So your insulin receptor activation goes down, and when that goes down, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Warburg effect, right? The effect of when a cell becomes inefficient, and now you can't make enough energy. So what happens? Weight gain, diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, and type 3 diabetes, also known as dementia now, right? Because of poor utilization of glucose and insulin. And then, this is happening earlier and earlier ages. So then, bone loss, the next step, right? And this is critical. Excuse me. When people crack a hip, 20% of those people will die, and another 50% lose 1 degree of mobility. So if they were walking, they walk with a cane. If they're walking with a cane, it's a walker. If it was a walker, now they're in a wheelchair. So metabolic inflammation, if you look through this, it's causing loss of muscle, which destabilizes your joints and your hips. You become anemic, which now I'm not oxygenating my tissues well. You become insulin resistant, which is creating an amazing, spectacular release of inflammatory compounds. And now we lose bone. And then in the end is where we get to the real cellular damage that occurs. And then, of course, as we lose our ability to regulate glucose in the brain, and we lose our mitochondrial capacity, we start to trigger more neuroinflammation, right? As soon as we're here, we start to trigger more neuroinflammation, and neuroinflammation creates oxidative stress. Oxidative stress destroys neurons. Neurons, as they break up, trigger more microglial activation. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of weight gain, heart disease because of the inflammation and plaque, blood sugar issues, and now, slow processing, foggy brain. Where did I put my keys? Right? Questions on this? Anything on this? What I'm going to tell you is aged garlic extract. I'll show you the studies. Work here, and work through here to really downregulate inflammation. There's very well done trials that'll show you its effect. From the aging perspective, so if you look, everyone's interested in this science, telomeres. Telomere length and aging, right? The shorter the telomere, the quicker you age. The reality is, what's shortening telomeres is inflammation signaling. So it's not the telomeres that are driving the bus. It's the fact that your body is in a chronic inflammatory state and you're accelerating, shortening your telomeres, which is then accelerating your aging. So here are all the, the various diseases of aging being driven by oxidative stress, inflammation, and then, angiogenesis. This is all reduction in circulation throughout your vessel network. So in the end, what we're trying to do is make sure we have enough energy in our cells as we're aging, right? We need to produce enough mitochondrial energy. When telomeres are short, they communicate with the mitochondria. And that communication triggers inflammation. So it's a self-fulfilling circle. The more I damage my telomeres, the more I tell my body to damage myself. That's why we have to, the goal is, how do we break that circuit? Because it's a circular motion. So telomeres send pro-inflammatory signals to the mitochondria, and they're basically called sparklet paths. But this is why you need to create lifestyle changes, right? Better diet, proper exercise, proper rest. But that's not always enough. Obviously, compounds that you can take that have great evidence behind them that can help manage inflammation can really help with sparing your mitochondria. So as the mitochondria start triggering more inflammation, they actually damage the DNA. So the DNA damage occurs at the telomere. So higher oxidative stress. If you're familiar with a very famous doctor that I followed, are you familiar with Dr. Reckwig in the 1960s? Anyone? Reckwig? Basically, what he said was that the more sick you get, the deeper you penetrate into your cell. And the end result of this is called cell de-differentiation, right? Where you can end up triggering cancer, right? So the goal is, don't allow mitochondrial damage. Protect your telomeres. This was a 2015 study of Japanese semi-centenarians. Inflammation, not telomere length, predicts successful aging to an advanced age. So, why do we research botanicals or nutraceuticals? Why do we listen about NAD upstairs just before the break? It's because we're looking for ways to keep ourselves youthful. And this is just another visualization of showing that with inflammaging, all of the different processes that I discussed occur. And so obviously, if you look here, this matrix degradation is the connective tissue. And as we trigger more inflammation throughout this, we trigger more senescent cells, or basically otherwise known as zombie cells, right? Zombie cells, yeah. That's what they're called. That throw off a lot of inflammatory cytokines, non-stop. They're immortal until you tell them to shut down. So until you make an active signal to your body, this occurs especially, it's kind of like with my knee, when you get over 60. I never liked this part of the talk. You know? I mean, and this is another piece of the puzzle. salivary cortisol and coronary artery calcification. This was the cardia study. You're supposed to make a lot of cortisol in the morning, right? Goes down, noon, goes down at 4, and goes to nothing at bedtime. And then melatonin's released, and then all of you sleep well, I know. 8 hours, you don't wake up. You wake up in the morning, you're ready to go. What this study showed was when you stay in fight or flight, so when your cortisol diurnal pattern flattens out, you're at a 3 1/3 time, 333% higher risk of coronary artery calcification. So the ability to help regulate the nervous system is incredibly important, and understanding the effect of chronic stress on coronary artery calcification, incredibly important. I have a question, if you could ask. How many people sleep 8 hours a night, don't wake up, and wake up refreshed? Raise their hand.
Okay. Wie viele von Ihnen schlafen nachts einfach toll und sind morgens nach 8 Stunden Schlaf?
Raise your hand.
Und
8 hours. Are you sure you translated? I always see a couple hands. That's it. All right, not many. Okay. So look, one of the biggest signs of hyperarousal of the HPA axis is when you have trouble sleeping. It's one of the biggest things that I do with patients is get them to get a good night's sleep. I keep giving them things until they just have to go to sleep. So take a little more melatonin. Maybe you need to take valerian, or maybe you need to take theanine or another nutrient. But get them prepared for sleep. And most of the time, I'll ask this question. I want to know this one too. How many people feel overcommitted or stressed during the day? More people heard that question. That was interesting. By default, if you are under chronic stress, you're walking towards heart disease and you want to neutralize those inflammatory signals. Right? That's what you want to be thinking about. I don't know if you can take away the fact maybe you work long hours or you have children at home and there's modern living can be stressful. But what you can do is try to counter the effect of that. So one of the biggest signs as it relates to heart disease, the world's #1 killer, as your C-reactive protein goes up and your nitric oxide goes down, your blood vessels get stiffer. And that creates more endothelial dysfunction. That means less blood to your kidneys, your heart has to pump harder, and now blood pressure starts going up. So the more that we can dampen this inflammatory compound, C-reactive protein, homocysteine, another one, the more we can create nitric oxide. One of the biggest features of H-garlic extract, of kyolic, multiple human studies, randomized, placebo-controlled crossover trials, is that it restores vessel flexibility, improves blood pressure, and also helps with nitric oxide formation. So allows for blood vessels to be more pliable. All right? And then, of course, TNF-alpha and IL-1 beta reduces the ability to generate energy, so more inflammatory compounds. All of it leads to electrical conduction. So you have more and more people today, right? You're getting more arrhythmias, you're seeing more SVTs, supraventricular tachycardias, right? Part of that's because of what's happened post-pandemic. It was a side effect of that. But it's also because people were moving into this high-stress metabolic inflammation at an earlier age. And the purpose in this study, if you look here, it's metaflammation and epigenetic changes in cardiorenal disease. So it's that thought of, as those blood vessels get more constricted and we lose blood flow to the kidneys, we lose redox potential in the kidneys. And that's what accelerates the aging of our kidneys, is the loss of redox poise. So this is trying to put it all together for you, and then we'll start to go through some of the research. But if you look, everywhere there's a star, these are known actions of aged garlic extract. There's actually some interesting effect even on the central nervous system, but the first is it's actually known as a prebiotic. So in human trials, they showed that aged garlic had a prebiotic effect, which keeps you from going to dysbiosis of the gut. When you create dysbiosis in the gut, you enhance intestinal permeability. And you increase metabolic endotoxemia or lipopolysaccharide. And lipopolysaccharide, of course, is one of the biggest compounds to signal in all your tissues NF-kappa B. So lipopolysaccharide attaches to your heart, kidneys, liver, pancreas, blood vessels, thyroid, autoimmune thyroid, lipopolysaccharide, of course, driving autoimmunity, driving low-grade inflammation, and there's insulin resistance. Inflammation up, insulin resistance up, leading to diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and then the end point being growth of the smooth muscle, and then thrombus formation. In every action, aged garlic extract has been shown to reverse vulnerable plaque. It's been shown to dampen inflammatory compounds, help with managing the flora, and also in balancing the nervous system. Why is it different? Aged garlic extract. There's only one company that makes aged garlic extract and has over 900 publications. That's Kyolic. It's not garlic oil capsules. You know what you can do with garlic oil capsules? You put a hole in it and you saute some broccoli or spinach. You can squirt it in your pan. There's no other value. That's it. Garlic oil. There's nothing to it. If you hear of allicin, you heard the researchers today. Allicin is incredibly unstable. They had to ship it at minus 80 centigrade centigrade to take it for the study of injecting it in a tumor. Minus 80 in order to keep it stable. How do you think it stays stable at room temperature? Every researcher agreed up there, right? So, it isn't by using allicin-based garlic. When you age garlic, you change its physical composition. You make new compounds from aged garlic. If you see organically grown, aged for approximately 18 months at a low temperature, you can take garlic, no scent. We call the stinking rose, right? No scent. I'm Italian, I like stinking rose. It's antioxidant, it's well studied. 250 steps in manufacturing to assure the quality of the end product. If you look at powders, like allicin powders, look at the first thing. High temperature dehydration most of the time. Allicin doesn't stand that. Now, you can eat, fresh garlic is wonderful. Eat it. It's good. It's not going to give you the effect clinically of aged garlic. Okay? The evidence, of course, if you look at therapeutic benefit, so these are clinical trials. Quite a few clinical trials, vascular function and circulation, and these have been published in Tier 1 primary referee journals from very notable universities. Fat tissue around the heart reduction, very important. Adiponectin, which is a measure of oxidative stress in the body, very important. So if you can notice, what Wakanaga has done is studied the pleiotropic effect of what H-garlic does biochemically in your body, and has done supportive studies for that. The common cold, reduces severity, frequency, and duration of a common cold. 40% reductions, very significant. I've already said this. Raw garlic taken in large quantities has been shown to cause side effects. Well, yeah, you're going to stink. And during the aging process, all of the organic sulfur compounds are converted to bioavailable compounds like S-allyl cysteine. And the majority of these pharmacologic effects are all conducted by H-garlic extract. So when you read about garlic, look at what was actually studied. Because someone will just bottle garlic powder and use H-garlic studies. So just to kind of reinforce, organic raw garlic, aged 250 processes to come to here, over 18 months, guaranteeing consistency of the product. That's what's important, is the consistency of this product. And then, of course, no compounds that are harsh or left. So this is the process, almost 2 years to get to the final product. So these are the endpoints. So raw garlic, glutamyl S-allyl cysteine, here is allicin, furostanol saponins, polysaccharides. These are the final compounds that in particular are the main active compounds. S-allyl cysteine, S1-propanil cysteine. Obviously, the inner lining of the artery, the glycocalyx. You guys are familiar with the glycocalyx? Sulfur compounds help to rebuild the glycocalyx, the inner lining of the artery. It provides the nutrients. As the inner lining of the artery gets damaged, you get more shearing force. You get more damage to the artery. Sulfur compounds help to improve that endothelial pliability by remodeling and supporting endothelial health. These are the compounds that are thought to be responsible for that. So once again, these are the sulfur compounds that are in aged garlic that are donating sulfur, as well as having other metabolic effects. It's not the only effect, but these are all of the compounds that are derived. So safety. So 90 days in rats. Do you have any rats come into your practice? You're going to be ready. But in a rat study, obviously, important for toxicology. If we see no effects on erythrocytes, no effect on hemoglobin, hematocrit, body weight, no ulceration, right? That's the thing we worry about when you take too much raw garlic, or even if it's allicin freeze-dried, it can be caustic to the lining of the stomach. The other one is that there's no concern with blood thinning. There was actually studies that showed there's no effect on INR time when giving aged garlic versus eating garlic, right? You can't eat garlic, but you can take aged garlic. There's no impact on your INR time for blood clotting. So if you see here, this was on the stomach mucosa in dogs, 24 hours after administration. Here is the control. This is garlic powder. This is aged garlic. So raw garlic powder creates, erosion, of course. Here, none with, this is in the Journal of Nutrition. So no gastric erosion. So these are all the effects that have been shown both in vivo and in vitro. So you'll see human studies here, 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 here now. You heard of this today. Same here. So all of these, in fact, I've seen in human trials affect all of these areas. And the big clinical studies, anti-atherosclerosis, antihypertensive, immunomodulation, these are what we're going to focus on because it's, this is our big #1 killer, right? All right. So, #1 selling garlic in the U.S., natural product channel. #1 selling on the analytic market in Japan. Sold in 50 countries. More than 900 peer-reviewed scientific articles. How many products on your shelf you can think of right now that have 900 peer-reviewed scientific articles? You got many? Couple? Vitamin C probably. Right? Vitamin C, maybe vitamin D, just because they're essential nutrients, so they've been studied, right? We learn them in our biochemistry. But when it comes to a nutraceutical, a botanical extract, I don't know another one that has this much evidence behind it. So let's go ahead and go through. Kyolic inhibits progression of coronary artery calcification. How many, you have patients on statin medications, right? Lovastatin, rosuvastatin, right? When you add aged garlic, you reduce progression of coronary artery calcification by 77%. That's a big number. And then reduces low attenuation plaque in the coronary arteries of those, which of course are pre-diabetic, pre-hypertensive. Low attenuation plaque or vulnerable plaque, of course, is the plaque that we worry about breaking off. And it has been shown to reverse vulnerable plaque. These two were important. In patients with diabetes, this was 2020, Budov and Shakir. So reducing it in patients with diabetes. Once someone has diabetes, their inflammation engine is turned way up. So when it's turned way up, that progression to plaque is much quicker. So to be able to do that in people with diabetes is important. And then this was the one that I just couldn't believe it. After 1 year of being on Kyolic, left ventricle mass reduced by 1.63% in people with diabetes. You don't see that happen, right? And people with diabetes, they've got renal hypertension, their heart's working hard, the ventricle's getting big. For it to remodel and reduce that volume by 1.63%, pretty important. Progression of coronary artery calcification versus placebo, a 65% reduction. This was 2004, 20 years ago. This was first shown. And then this is with patients with known coronary artery disease or high risk for coronary artery disease. The placebo was statin and aspirin. Of course, statin, aspirin for your placebo, add aged garlic, significant reduction in coronary artery calcification. Inhibits progression here, if you look. Glucose improvement. What I think is amazing, the characterization of this. Down-regulating IL-6, since it's the real inflammatory cytokine that's triggering things like gut permeability, damage to the inner lining of the arteries, damaged neuroinflammatory response. And then, of course, the obvious of, improving these other parameters as well. This is my favorite slide. I love this slide. So this is a clearly scan, vulnerable plaque scan. All right? Here, this is the baseline of an artery. This is the clearly scan. This is not adjusting for anything else. We didn't put people on a treadmill and make them walk. We didn't make them stay away from all the great noodles, right? Did nothing other than aged garlic extract. Look at the difference in the endothelium. High risk here, actually high risk here. Now we've got a very stable, non-thickened vascular wall. All right? And so when we see the percent change of plaque volume in a 1-year follow-up, it is significant. You don't need numbers to see this one, right?
Aber wenn ich das richtig sehe, ist das die doppelte Dosierung von der, die jetzt hier empfohlen wird. Es sind 4 Kapseln und auf der Packung steht da drauf, was das eigentlich die Dosage ist.
Well, this was the dose in this study.
Yes.
Yes.
That was
Correct.
his question.
Yeah, so if I'm at high risk, I would take more. If I'm preventative, stay with the regular dose. So if someone's at high risk, or you already have existing coronary artery disease, I don't know another compound that throws this kind of data out. So yeah, you would have to use your judgment and decide on dosing. I regularly give out, for my at-risk people, I have a lot of them in the States, I give the higher dose when I know they've got existing coronary artery calcification. The advantage you have is if people take the liquid, you can get to the dose with the liquid very easy too. For your people that are at higher risk, you could use the liquid. Reduces low attenuation plaque in coronary arteries with diabetes. We kind of already talked about this, but if you look, AGE, if you look at the difference in dense calcium as well as fatty calcium. So, if you look here, this is the fibrous. It's pretty significant. And this is, of course, where you can, throw a clot. So the big difference versus placebo. Do you have anything now that's a go-to? Just asking. What's your go-to for people that have existing heart disease? What do you give them now? Anyone? Fish oil. That it's always the fight. You're not there to treat their heart disease. You're there to act as someone for lifestyle prevention to keep it from getting worse. That's different. That's a completely different problem you're solving. And I know from the time I was behind a counter before I was a clinician. I owned 2 clinics. I don't have all day many times to consult. I have to be quick and I have to know something that's good. And so that's why for 30 years, I've really been a big believer in this. This left ventricle myocardial patient mass, this is the one that showed a 1.63% improvement. I already had mentioned this, but this was the arm. This was experimental therapeutics in medicine in 2020. This is very difficult to do, right? And think of it this way, you're not treating your left ventricle. Think about someone early with insulin resistance and they haven't enlarged their heart yet. What can we recommend to help people to not progress? How do we keep people staying more in homeostasis? Right? It's great that it works for that. It's phenomenal science. But your real goal should be, how do I keep you from having an increased plaque burden? How do I keep you from having left ventricle enlargement? Right? How do I keep you from developing type 3 diabetes or dementia? Right? This is our issue, right? when people start having a enlarged left ventricle, they eventually end up congestive heart failure. How fun is life then? Right? How active can you be then? So get in front of it, right? Get in front of it. Endothelial function, these are amazing. So Kyolic increases blood flow. So if you did nothing else, if you're old enough, the term hardening of the arteries, right? Hardening of the arteries was a term that used to get used a lot. And that's exactly what happens. Your blood vessels get stiff as you're aging. And when your blood vessels get stiff, you can't deliver oxygen to your periphery, into your tissues, into your organs. And that's one of the causes in multi-organ heart failure, right? Is you lose circulation and flow to your organs, and you trigger inflammation as a byproduct. So both of these showing improvement in the inner lining endothelial function, right? So this arterial media, right? This is why we give ACE and ARB drugs, right? Angiotensin drugs, is to reduce the proliferation of this.
Ich wollte noch was fragen, und zwar habe ich einen Kunden, der nimmt gleichzeitig ein Statin, einen Blutdrucksenker, ein Mittel gegen Diabetes und ein Blutverdünnungsmittel. Dem empfehle ich jetzt zum Beispiel, er hat ja schon all diese Krankheiten, zur Vorsicht erstmal 2 Kapseln pro Tag. Wann soll ich ihn zum ersten Mal zum Arzt schicken, um zu kontrollieren, ob sich die Werte verbessert haben? Nach einem Jahr oder eher? Oder was soll ich tun?
At least 90 days. 90 days. Yeah, that'd be good. And the other thing you could check, it's the lower dose, so it may not happen, but if they're on blood pressure medication, they should get their blood pressure, they should check their blood pressure, just to see if it's going, lowering it would be good, right? Less medication would be good, but they should check if they're feeling any lightheadedness or if they have a blood pressure cuff, they should at least check. The lower dose, it's probably going to be very gradual, so they won't feel it.
But do you start with 4 at once or with 2 capsules?
For her patient,
Yeah.
I would do 2.
You would do 2.
Just to start, see how they do. Just consider complex patient, right? Complex case, I usually start conservative. No problem, great. Then you could move to 4. This is another incredibly important one, that it improves cutaneous microcirculation. If you see here, percent change in blood flow. This obviously happens when you're old, but this also happens in people that overtrain. They break down their microcapillaries, and now they can't get blood flow. It happens in people with diabetes, right? That's why they have peripheral vascular disease. COVID long haul, same. They lose microcapillary circulation. And that's been shown in studies that they measure microcapillary status, right? And they lose the 4 and 6 and 8 micron microcapillaries in long haul because of extended inflammatory cytokine storm that's going on. So this is a great study that shows increased perfusion into the microcirculation, and they've even done thermographies on periphery to show changes in body temperature in the periphery as well. And then endothelial dysfunction, right? That's why people are on diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, blood thinners, right? Beta blockers, right? They're on beta blockers because as you have endothelial dysfunction, you're sympathetic dominant, and now you start to accelerate heart rate, right? And so improving endothelial dysfunction, this was in people with diabetes. Once again, what is the most important thing? My grandmother was diabetic, blind, fingerless, and I remember she would feel my face to see how I grew. I got to see her once a year. She'd feel my face with her hands. And when I was 5, I decided I want to know everything about diabetes. Because I didn't want to end up like that. And so when you can improve peripheral vascular blood flow in people with diabetes, prediabetes, that's one of the biggest side effects. Non-traumatic blindness, peripheral vascular disease, right? And then of course on blood pressure, the most striking blood pressure study, I don't believe is in here yet, but it was just released from Brazil. All the participants were from age 19 to 52, and they all were resistant hypertensives. They were given aged garlic, an average drop at 1 month, 18 points systolic. If you average out what you get with, because I don't want to, I know we're running, just want to kind of make sure we get out of here on time for you guys. But the point being is the average will be about 10 to 12 points systolic, about 5 points diastolic, up to 6, 5 to 6 diastolic. I see it all the time, all the time. So once again, effective at reducing peripheral and central blood pressure. So if you see here, average difference between garlic and placebo here was 5. Central aortic blood pressure, 3.8, minus 3.8, pretty amazing. And our arterial stiffness going down significantly. That's 2 capsules a day for 3 months. And then this was a study that was done by Dr. Reed, who you got to hear. So first of all, a 10-point systolic and a 5.4 diastolic. Like I said, there's about 5 significant trials with aged garlic that if I just give you the mean of it, it's around 10 to 12 points systolic, around 5 to 6 points diastolic. The outlier was the last study, 1812. I mean, most of them have been right around here. Still significant, right? Especially for people that have resistant hypertension. They already are on medication. And we know the more meds they get on for their hypertension, the worse they feel, the more polypharmacy event that can occur. And then on the microbiota, interestingly, when you take aged garlic, it influences the microbiome because of its resistant starch is what it basically is. It acts as a prebiotic to feed the beneficial flora. And then that was basically a side effect of the study. I mean, they were looking at pulse pressure and arterial stiffness, which they showed that for uncontrolled hypertensives, this was the case. But the side effect of it was that the gut microbiome got better, which makes sense, right? The microbiome is more intact, the less inflammatory signaling goes on, right? Systemically, 70% of the immune system being in the gut. So this was the effect here. Marked increase of lactobacillus, and of course everybody hears Clostridia and thinks it's bad, but obviously there are good Clostridia species. And so a definite improvement in diversity of what I call parent or innate microbiota. And then on cardiovascular markers, if you look here, 2 are probably the biggest markers for triggering inflammatory chemistry, or TNF-alpha and IL-6, right? So if you look, TNF-alpha IL-6 change versus baseline on aged garlic, a significant change after baseline. So this is actually just, for me, the majority of the literature circles around this in autoimmunity, for example, right? Psoriatic arthritis, TNF-alpha, right? So we're trying to, once again, we're not here to treat psoriatic arthritis, but if you could give something for someone on maintenance that kept those inflammatory markers down, you slow the march towards those types of illnesses. And obviously, once again, same thing. uncontrolled hypertension. And then immunomodulation. This was the study that was in obese individuals that showed a dramatic there's about a 30%, 33% reduction in IL-6 and TNF-alpha in people that were obese. When someone goes into a hospital, if they're obese and they have a procedure, typically there's a lot more risk for that person because they're in a ground state, their body's already inflamed, and they have a lot more adverse events. The other piece to notice, so if you see here, at week 6 in placebo, we're at 3.8 on IL-6, 2.8 here. It's about a 33% drop. 4.2 to 3.9, not quite as dramatic, but significant. And then, of course, looking at T killer cells to natural killer cells, an improvement in NK and T killer cells. These are called gamma delta T killer cells. Gamma delta T killer cells are the T killer cells that are ready to fight. They're not adolescent, they're matured, and they're ready to fight a virus or a bug. So you get an improvement in both natural killer cell regulation and also gamma delta T killer cells. What's happening is these cells are moving to these cells, so you're prepared more for a fight. That's basically the population is changing between these two subsets of immune cells. Conclusion. I'll make it easy. Recommend Kyolic. How many of you knew of Kyolic before today? Some of you did. How many of you recommended it already in your practice? Not much. You did, okay. How many of you are thinking maybe you should start taking Kyolic now? There we go. I did my job. All right, that's what we did. Very good. All right, thank you for having me.